this now has opened the door, I think, for the NHL to look quite seriously at having 2 Canadian hub cities rather than, as I said, I would have said none, a month ago.
What a day it was on Friday, especially in Florida. The Tampa Bay Lightning's facility closed. The Philadelphia Phillies, the Toronto Blue Jays. In Arizona, it was the San Francisco Giants, and that's just to name a few as COVID has hit. Welcome to Hockey Central at Home. I'm Carolyn Cameron alongside Chris Johnston, and this is where things could get interesting in terms of talks between the NHL and the NHLPA because, Chris, they've yet to agree on the safety protocols for moving to phase 3, which is training camp, and then to phase 4, a full return to play. How do you think even Friday could impact those talks?
Well, I think, if anyone wasn't taking this seriously, and I'm just talking about some of the players maybe didn't view this as quite the threat, this will get everyone's attention. And what the series of positive tests underlines to me is just how much more they have to ratchet up the controls when you get to phase 3, which is training camps, and then phase 4, which is the competition phase. And obviously the testing and everything that goes with that will go up with it as well. And the theory, at least behind how they're trying to manage this, is that once you get more players in that system, they're being tested regularly. Obviously in the case of the 11 players that have tested positive already in phase 2, they're isolated from that point. They're kept away from everyone until they're showing no symptoms and produce negative tests. Once you get into that, the idea is that this will become more manageable and you won't have as many positive tests. And so, I do think to a certain degree, this was expected that there would be positive tests. You've had players away from their teams for 12, 13, 14 weeks in some cases. Obviously this has spread quite a bit, especially here in North America of late. So I don't know that this is a surprise to the league, but obviously this makes big headlines and there are some challenges. I think this just kind of reinforces the challenges that the NHL and the NHL Players Association are facing.
Well, and there's not only spikes in Florida or Arizona, there's spikes in many states in the United States. Could we have a scenario now where there could be more than one hub city in Canada?
Well, I certainly think that's become a possibility. And I would never have guessed that a month ago. I mean, it just shows you how quickly this is moving. And I think it also reminds us why the NHL has waited, until relatively late in the process before declaring which 2 cities will be hub cities, because they wanted as much information as possible. And especially in the US of late, a lot has changed with some of those numbers. I mean, it's been bad in Texas as well as Arizona and Florida. Even Nevada has seen, some of their highest per day rates in the last week alone. I still think Las Vegas is viewed quite favorably by the league. It's probably been the favorite the entire time to become one of the hubs. But with some of the changes we've seen now here in Canada in the last few days, with the government signing off on allowing the NHL to bypass a 14-day quarantine to create what's called a cohort quarantine, where essentially they've promised A, to test regularly, and B, to keep the players and staff completely separate from the Canadian public when they enter the country. This now has opened the door, I think, for the NHL to look quite seriously at having 2 Canadian hub cities rather than, as I said, I would have said none, a month ago.
Well, and in terms of safety and especially protocol, this is where it gets interesting for players in whatever phase they're in. If they do test positive, what that means for their anonymity, doesn't it?
It does, and I think the league has taken steps here. I mean, you saw Friday night's announcement from the NHL. It just said 11 players out of the more than 200 tested in phase 2. Prior to that, it had been individual teams announcing, whether it was the Colorado Avalanche or the Ottawa Senators, the Boston Bruins, Arizona Coyotes. They all had either a player or staff member test positive, and they announced that it was, a member of their team or multiple members of their team. I think the league is sensitive to the fact that, these players don't want to be identified. In most cases, obviously, if any player or staff member wants to speak about his own experience, he's welcome to. It doesn't have to be kept secret. I think it'll become much more challenging, though, when you get to training camps or obviously the competition phase, because it may be a case where a player is with the team every day at practice or playing games, and then they disappear one day. I mean, I don't know how they plan to handle that, but I certainly think there will be natural speculation if players miss a string of days that they've contracted the virus. But I understand why first of all, the players have a right to some privacy when it comes to their medical histories, and why the league's doing what they can. And for at least the remainder of phase 2 here, you're just going to have the NHL blanket announcing positive tests.
So safety and protocol is what the league and NHLPA are speaking about, but that's not the only thing, because the current collective bargaining agreement, it expires in September of 2022. Do you think that they are going to get that finalized and renegotiated before a return to play this year?
Something has to get done for them to play. It's probably not going to be a full CBA. The indications that I'm getting, Caroline, are more that it's going to be either some key terms will be extended or a memorandum of understanding. Maybe the outwork or the outline of the framework of a new CBA will be done. But even though there's 2 years plus left on the current CBA, the conditions around the way the league operates, the way the financial structure of the entire sport is going to work for the next couple of years has changed dramatically with this pause, and with the fact that for the foreseeable future anyway, we're not going to have fans paying to enter arenas to watch games, which changes the business of hockey. And so they're working around a system that will see a salary cap fixed for a couple seasons beyond just what will get completed this summer. There's going to be some curtails on the escrow that players pay, basically try to help everyone minimize the damage or spread it out over a number of years instead of have it all come in the next year or two. And it does sound as though they're pretty far along the process with those talks, because that's all got to be finalized by the end of June in my eyes, in addition to the protocols that govern training camps and the return to play. At some point, that entire package has to be presented to NHL players for voting, and that's going to have to happen by the end of June if they're going to be able to open camps on time for July 10th.
I know it's important, but I think we've said processes and protocols a little bit too much. So let's switch to something a little more fun. You got to vote on a good number of the NHL awards last week. I know you're not supposed to share all of your votes, but can you at least share maybe a couple if it doesn't get you in trouble?
Well, I don't mind a little bit of trouble, and certainly I don't mind justifying any of my selections, and they do ultimately become public. Everyone's votes do now once these awards are announced. I would say for me, the two that were probably the most challenging, or where my heart was being pulled in a couple directions, was the Hart Trophy and the Calder Trophy. The Hart race is always a little bit tricky because of the wording. The player adjudged to be most valuable to his team. I think that there's lots of ways that can be taken. You're not voting on who you necessarily view as the absolute best player that year, or the MVP in a traditional sense. And for that reason, my number one vote went to Artemi Panarin of the New York Rangers. And I think if you look at Panarin's season closely, first of all, the Rangers were a completely different team when he was on the ice and when he was off the ice. In simple terms, when he was on the ice, they were very good. When he was off the ice, they weren't good at all. And I think that was for me a clear measure of his impact on their team. I don't even think they'd be in the 24 teams that have been invited back to resume the playoffs this summer if it weren't for Panarin signing there last year. And I do think he stacks up well against the other competition. I mean, Leon Draisaitl had such a marvelous offensive season for Edmonton, but Panarin actually outscored him at 5-on-5. And so, certainly not dogging on Draisaitl, because I did give him my second vote of the 800 NHL players for the Hart. And I do think he probably will win the trophy, the Oilers center. But, for me, Panarin wins out there. When it came to the Calder for Rookie of the Year, I mean, Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes, the debate had really for months, even before the end of the season, how you pick between them. Their point totals were similar. Their underlying stats were similar. I thought when you really dug into the numbers that Quinn Hughes made a more measurable impact on his teammates. He played for a weaker team in the Canucks than the Colorado Avalanche were this year. It's only by the slimmest of margins, but Quinn Hughes got my top vote for Rookie of the Year, with Cale Makar coming second behind him.
And for today, at least on your Twitter, Canucks fans love you, and Oilers fans, well, maybe not so much.
Well, that's part of voting. You can't keep everyone happy. You just make the best choice you can make with the information you have.
Honesty. That's what we always get from Chris Johnston. CJ, appreciate it. Stay well.
You too, Carolyn. Thank you.